The forest was quiet in the way only forgotten places could be, tall trees, standing like silent witnesses, dry leaves crunching under bare feet, and sunlight barely touching the ground. 12-year-old Elijah had learned long ago not to expect kindness from the world. Hunger had been his teacher, cold his companion, and loneliness his shadow. Every morning he entered the forest to gather sticks for firewood, trading small bundles in town for scraps of food. That day felt no different, until he heard a sound that didn't belong. A low groan, weak, human. Elijah followed it carefully, fear tightening his chest. Then he saw him. A grown man in a blue suit lay on the forest floor, hands bound, eyes covered, face bruised. He looked completely out of place, like money had dressed him but fate had abandoned him. Elijah froze. Everything inside him screamed to run. People like that didn't belong to boys like him. But then the man whispered, barely audible, "Help, please." Elijah remembered every time he had asked for help and been ignored. Every door slammed, every face turned away. His heart pounded as he knelt beside the stranger. He could have walked away. No one would have known. Instead, he dropped his sack of sticks, untied the ropes with shaking fingers, and pulled the cloth from the man's eyes. The man looked up, shocked, not by the forest but by the boy. "Why would you help me?" the man asked weakly. Elijah swallowed hard. "Because someone should." The man passed out again. Elijah spent the rest of the day hiding him, bringing water from a nearby stream, fanning him with leaves, guarding him through the night. He didn't know the man was a millionaire. He didn't know this moment would change his life forever. All he knew was that for once, he chose compassion over survival, and fate was watching. When the man finally woke fully, the forest looked different. The sun had risen higher, and Elijah sat nearby, chewing on nothing, pretending not to be hungry. The man introduced himself as Jonathan Hale. His voice was calm, controlled, the voice of someone used to power. He explained how he'd been kidnapped after refusing to sell his company to criminals, dumped in the forest to die. Jonathan looked at the boy's torn clothes, thin arms, and tired eyes. "How long have you been alone?" he asked quietly. Elijah shrugged. "Always." That single word hit harder than any blow Jonathan had taken. When authorities finally arrived, guided by Elijah, running miles barefoot to town, the truth came out. Jonathan Hale was one of the richest businessmen in the state. Reporters swarmed. Police praised the rescue. But the real shock came weeks later. Elijah expected nothing. He returned to the streets, to the same hunger, the same cold. Then a black car pulled up. Jonathan stepped out, knelt in front of Elijah, and said, "You saved my life. Now let me change yours." Jonathan didn't just give him money. He gave him a home, education, therapy, love. Years passed. Elijah grew into a confident young man, standing on a graduation stage with Jonathan watching proudly from the front row. But the final shock came when Jonathan announced the Elijah Foundation, an organization dedicated to homeless children, run by Elijah himself. The boy who once begged for scraps now stood in boardrooms changing lives. In his first speech, Elijah said, "I didn't save a millionaire. I saved a human being. And that kindness saved me too." The crowd stood in silence, then applause thundered, because the world finally understood. Sometimes the poorest hands carry the richest hearts. Years had passed, but the memory of that morning in the forest never left Elijah's heart. The smell of dry leaves, the fear in his chest, the choice he made when no one was watching, it all lived inside him. Elijah was no longer the barefoot, homeless boy carrying firewood to survive another night. He now sat in classrooms, held books in his hands, and slept in a bed that was warm. Yet every night before closing his eyes, he remembered who he had been, because he never wanted to forget where kindness had first found him. Jonathan Hale didn't just rescue Elijah from the streets. He gave him something far greater, belief. Belief that his past did not define his future. Still, the world wasn't always gentle. At school, whispers followed him. Some called him the charity kid. Others assumed he was lucky, not brave. Elijah stayed silent. He had learned early that dignity didn't need defending. It revealed itself in time. One afternoon, a teacher asked the class a simple question. If you had the power to change the world, what would you do? Students talked about money, fame, and success. Then Elijah stood up. His voice was calm but steady. "I would look for the children everyone ignores," he said, "because once I was invisible too. The room fell quiet. That night, Jonathan said nothing. He simply hugged him, tears in his eyes. As Elijah grew older, his purpose became clearer. Instead of running from his past, he walked straight back into it. He returned to the same streets where he once slept hungry, the same corners where children still curled up with no one to protect them. This time, he didn't come with empty hands. He came with a plan. "You saved me," he told Jonathan, "but if we stop there, the story ends too soon." Within a year, the Elijah Foundation was born, a shelter for homeless children, a school for forgotten minds, a place where no child would ever be called invisible again. At the foundation's opening ceremony, reporters gathered, cameras flashing. They expected a polished speech. Instead, Elijah spoke from the heart. "I didn't save a millionaire," he said. "I saved a man who needed help. And in doing that, I saved myself." Jonathan stood in the crowd, no longer the powerful businessman everyone admired, but a grateful man who knew his life had been spared by a child the world had abandoned. That day, the applause was loud, but the silence afterward was louder, because people finally understood something powerful. Heroes don't always wear suits. Sometimes they wear torn clothes, carry heavy burdens, and still choose kindness. Elijah's journey did not end with success. It began with purpose. The boy who once had nothing had become someone who gave everything.